All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Jessica Turner-Skoff, if you do not know me. I am thrilled that we are going to go on this journey together of how gardens can and will save the world. What do I mean by this? Well, first of all, we're going to be talking about why plants need their stories shared. This section, for all you plant people, might feel a little bit redundant or like yeah, no, of course. But how often do we take a step back and tell the story of plants in the entirety of how they matter and why they're important? Then we're going to be going into why gardens should be the ones to share these stories. And we're going to end with how gardens, like Longwood, are here to save the world. To start, there are over 350,000 different types of plant species. That's a tremendous amount of diversity. And they're amazing. Unto themselves, plants are absolutely incredible. And I'm going to bring back that first question. How often do we just stop and celebrate plants? If I went out to a random person on the street and I said, what's the largest organism? What do you think most people would probably say?
Blue whale.
Male blue whale. But in fact, it's Pando, the quaking aspen, Populus tremuloides. This is over 106 acres. It weighs over 13 million pounds. And this is a clone. They are all the same. What about the tallest living thing? Probably a giraffe. That's our animal bias. It's actually Hyperion. It is a coastal redwood. It's over 380 feet. Now, if you look at this image, you might see some little bursts of color. Those are people. This is a very, very tall tree, over 1,000 years old. And you have to think about that small seed grew where it was. Animals can move. Plants can't most of the time. Asterisk, as a scientist, I have to say that. But not only is Hyperion over 380 feet, it's 1/4 times taller than the Statue of Liberty. Why is Hyperion not a household name? Why is Pando not a household name? Now, I mentioned this tree is about 1,000 years old. This looks like a baby compared to Methuselah. This bristlecone pine is over 4,700 years old. Now, that is a really big number. That's really hard for humans' brains, which are in the lifespan of 100 years being a long time. So to put this in perspective, woolly mammoths were walking the earth while this tree was alive. The pyramids of Giza were not built until this thing was about 200 to 300 years old. So already what we would consider an ancient tree today, that was in its infancy, pretty much. Amazing. So if we're looking at the size of plants, they can be tremendously small. This is a species of watermeal or genus of watermeal. It can be 1 millimeter in length. When we look at the reproductive capabilities of plants, look at the extremes of the lily corpse flower. This thing, crazy life history, absolutely amazing. It's parasitic. Basically, you don't even know it's going to be there until all of a sudden it blooms. It smells terrible, and it's over 3 feet across. Seeds of plants can also be to the extremes. As we know, orchid seeds, if you've spent any time with the orchid people here, they are essentially dust. They can be as small as 0.05 millimeters. When I took this picture, I know I breathed in a lot of them, getting close and everything like that. But compare that to the double coconut. This is over 20 inches long and around 55 pounds. That's how much it can get to. And that weighs more than my 6-year-old. So put that into perspective. Regardless of where you are in this world, there's most likely a plant nearby. Your fun fact for the day is even Antarctica has 2 species of plants that grow in its frigid, frozen wonderfulness. They are so many different forms, so many different shapes, so many different sizes, so many different extremes of where they live, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Animals can move. Plants generally don't, which really speaks to the exceptional diversity that we see and how absolutely resilient plants are. They've been around for 470 million years. They can be found on every continent, as I mentioned. They can be found from the tundra to hot volcanic soil. Even the elevation difference. They can live 20,000 feet above sea level to 190 feet below the ocean's surface. This is just a celebration of the amazingness of plants. I think that we all do need to take a step back and just appreciate the intrinsic, amazing, inherent value that these organisms have. Now, when we look at what plants do for us, well, first of all, they support life. All other living things depend on plants. And this really comes down to plants being a primary producer. So what plants do, they take in CO2, which is of course, waste product that we breathe out, and with water and a little bit of sunlight, they create the energy that drives everything else, all other life. And they create oxygen, which, I don't know if you know this, but it's a little essential for us to be able to live and survive. So this is just the start of it, though. I'm going to show you this next slide. It's a model from NASA, and you're going to be able to see carbon dioxide levels and carbon monoxide levels in the world over the course of a year. Now, I have the months on the side, and that'll be, of course, oriented to the northern hemisphere, since that's where we are. And what you can see is the darker the red, that is higher levels of carbon dioxide, the pinks. And if you look at the whites, that's higher levels of carbon monoxide. But take a second and look at Brazil. What's right here? What can be found in Brazil? The Amazon. You can actually see the daily pulse of what these trees are contributing to the oxygen of the world. That's why they're called the lungs of the earth. Now it's getting really scary because it's in early May. We haven't had leaf out yet, so the leaves have not emerged. But look at what happens as we slowly get into June and into July of the summer months. This is what's happening with plants. Every single day, they need to be celebrated. Without this, we would not be alive. They're really important environmental regulators. They're regulating the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, water cycles. They are anchors of ecosystems. They provide habitat both directly and indirectly for animals. Oftentimes people like to separate themselves from animals, but we can't. We are animals, and I feel like that's something that I think is very important to remind people. And plants very much support us. First and foremost, plants are food. They're either the food of your food or they are the food itself. But that is incredibly important for our survival. And we have a really cool interwoven history. So this is an image of corn and its closest wild relative. And you can see over the 10,000 years I believe it was in Mexico, groups of people were breeding corn, cultivating it. And that shows the cultural connection that we have, that we were able to change this grass into one of the most grown plants in the United States. There are countless examples, if you look at history, how much humans have shaped plants through domestication. Everything from apples to tulips. Michael Pollan has a great book, Botany of Desire, if you'd like to learn more about that. Plants are also essential for medicine. Over 28,000 different plant species are used, and that number is only going to grow. One of my dearest friends is an ethnopharmacologist, and she goes to areas where people use plants as traditional medicine, works with them, and then takes it back to the lab to test it to see if it can impact the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. There's countless people who are working on tapping into the power of nature to solve some of our biggest health issues. Not only that, but one of the best anti-cancer medicines comes from the Pacific yew tree. I think it's Taxol. Aspirin is stone's throw from willow. There's even evidence that Neanderthals were using willow to help alleviate pain. There is a rich tradition and culture that will only continue if plants are around. From the clothing that we wear, the food that we eat, what makes our food taste better, to our entertainment, we use plants every single day. And I know this audience knows that, but I think it's really important that we take that step back. A couple times this week, all I ask you is to stop what you're doing, look around and think about all the ways plants are currently impacting your situation. It's just a very humbling moment to really connect you to how important they are to our lives. There's study after study after study after study that has been done that demonstrates that being around trees and nature is essential for human physical and mental health. There's research that shows if you have a green view from your hospital room, and these studies are removing extraneous variables. So if you have this green view from your hospital room, you're more likely to heal faster, better, need fewer heavy doses of painkillers. There's research that shows that if kids have a green view from their cafeteria that's diverse, that they're more likely to plan on going to school, college. They have career ambitions. They have higher test scores. And again, that's removing a lot of extraneous variables, really focusing on what that impact of the plants are on the people. And as this case I put together, a resilient future will 100% depend on plants. If we do not have plants, we will not survive. This is kind of a disconnect in society though, and what are some of the reasons for that? Well, the next slide I'm going to show you, you might have seen something like this before, but what's the first thing that you notice? If you didn't notice the big cat, I would be shocked. The human brain is hardwired to immediately try to identify the threats that could impact you and be detrimental to your health. So there are some spiky plants in the back, but that's not going to be as intense as, of course, this big cat. This used to be called plant blindness. Now it's plant awareness disparity. And it's the idea that plants are so ubiquitous in our life, they're not moving, but they're so entrenched in our culture that we don't really always notice them. They're not getting the credit that they deserve. As such, let's do a little trick question. So I bet you can guess where this is going. Which one of these is more endangered in its native range? We have the Fraser fir, America's favorite Christmas tree, and as Longwood employees, we know how important that can be. Or the giant panda, China's national treasure. What do you think? What's more endangered? It's a trick question. It's the Fraser fir. It is actually endangered, where the panda has recently been downlisted to vulnerable. These are things that the public isn't getting this information because even as plant people, we're not always getting this information. All right, why is this? First of all, most schools stop teaching plant-based concepts in the 3rd grade. That's tremendously young, especially if you're not getting an influence from home and society. 0% of middle schoolers in focus groups across the country said they had heard of the word horticulture, which of course is the art and science of growing plants. And that, can definitely be seen from not getting it in the schools. But there's also just a societal disconnect. The average person in the US can identify more than 1,000 brands and logos, but fewer than 10 local plants. Now I want to take a second and share my own story. So that little cutie right there is Jessica, circa late 80s, early 90s. I love that windbreaker. I wish I still had it. But look at the adoration that I am showing that herb garden. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household that celebrated plants. It was a huge part of my childhood. We would celebrate my mom's birthday every year at the Franklin Park Conservatory. My senior skip day was at Dawes Arboretum. Let's just take that. But however, it was embarrassingly long before I realized that I could have a viable, amazing career working with plants. And that's coming from having that experience with my childhood and just, so that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about is how we can connect people to understand this earlier on in their lives. And of course I became a scientist, so I don't want to sit around and be wrong. I want to be anatomically correct there. All right, so we talked about a resilient future being important for plants. What's going on? What's causing this impact? And so the next couple slides, I'm going to be honest, they're a little scary, they're a little uncomfortable, but this is ultimately a message of hope, so just bear with me. First of all, there's a lot of big threats right now. We have habitat loss, just completely destroying where plants can grow. We have climate change, which is causing all sorts of chaos, and we have natural disasters. The fun thing about these threats is they kind of work together and augment each other and just cause a huge travesty. But what's the underlying issue? Why do we really care about these threats? At the end of the day, we're concerned about biodiversity loss. That's the issue. We want to make sure that we have these animals and plants and all sorts of other living things in our lives, because diversity is always good, and more diversity is better. Plants are resilient, but now more than ever, they really need our help. Because there are over 80,000 threatened plant species. To put that in perspective, that's more than all of the described mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, combined. There are more threatened plant species than all of those together. This also raises what I think of as more of a philosophical question. And diversity now means diversity later. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you have one species over eons, that tree is going to evolve into multiple, or this plant will evolve into multiple different species over time. If this tree were to go extinct here, we're losing all of that other diversity. And I don't want to be part of the group that's deciding what is in the future. When we're getting rid of this genetic material that's taken millions of years to get where it is, the philosophy of deciding whether or not it should be there or it's okay if it dies off, I don't feel like that's a call that humans can make. And we can't just sit around and wait for somebody to help us. So the Endangered Species Act, this is often looked at as, hey, this will solve our issue. Well, first of all, it took 4 years for plants to be included on the Endangered Species Act. 4 years. And when we look at the funding breakdown, it's pretty dire. Animals get 1.17 billion, 3 comma club. Plants get 23 million. That equates to 2.4 million per animal and 30,000 for plant. Even though plants are essential for all other life, they are being disregarded. Plants are essential. We need them. Horticulture is essential. We need to be able to grow them. Therefore, gardens are essential. We've talked about why plants need their stories shared. Now let's jump into why gardens should be the ones to share this story and how gardens like Longwood are saving the world. See, this is where we're going to get into the hopeful part, so it's not just all sadness looking at the state of the world. All right, when I see this figure, this is something that is truly a thing of beauty for me. So each of these dots, it's a garden. And now if it's in the red or it's a shaded area, that just means it's an area that has really high levels of diversity. So it's called a biodiversity hotspot. But when we look at this, this is a network of over 3,000 gardens that are all communicating with not each other, but there's a huge network of communication. There's over 500 million visitors a year. There are people that pay to come to us and learn information. That is the best form of audience. You talk to any sort of marketer and they're like, yes, that's incredible. We have an engaged audience. We have a network of experts. Gardens are essential for conservation. They're natural advocates for plants. You come to Longwood because you want to see some really cool plants and you want to see a lot of different types of cool plants. We have expertise in horticulture and plant science, among many other disciplines. We have collections. We will talk more about that in a minute. We have specialized facilities. We have that intense network, and we have, again, the willing audience. And when I talk about Longwood, I think it's important for us all to just take a step back and look at what Longwood is. It's more than its parts. Longwood is a research center, library, and archive. It's a performing art venue. It's an informal and formal learning center. We have farmland and natural areas. We're an arboretum, which is a garden focused on trees. We are a display garden, which is looking at amazing horticultural feats. And we are a botanic garden, which is a garden that has collections. Longwood helps share and continue the story of plants. And one of the ways that we do this is through science. And science is a word that has a lot of people, makes people tense up because they had a terrible high school science teacher. But we are using science to help conserve, grow, sustain, and inspire. And people, again, get intimidated when they see the word science, and you can probably understand why, especially if you look at stock images. This is what people see when there's scientists mentioned. Again, some science looks like this. It did not look like any of the science that I did during my dissertation. And this is a really limiting perspective, especially when we look at this figure here. We have observe, question, educate, guess, experiment, evaluate, conclusion, share results. What is this? I heard somebody say scientific method. That is it. This is what science is. Science is simply a process, and we all do science every single day. Yes, absolutely, we have people who have been trained on the best way to ask these questions, the best way to use this process. But that's what science is. And I think we all just need to be more comfortable with it, and that we're using it, it's critical thinking. And Longwood, we're using this to ask big questions like, how can we grow plants to make sure they're around for the future? Which plants should we be growing, maintaining, and sharing? How can we make our gardens more sustainable through material circularity? How can we grow plants in extraordinary ways? How can we conserve and restore biodiversity where we live, where we work, where we play? And how can we share the story of science? At the end of the day, while our science starts here at Longwood, we want to do so much more. We want to have that global impact, changing the world, and making sure we have this resilient future. We're doing this through our incredible team of people. The science team has around 50 people right now, but it's so much more. It's all of us working together at Longwood. We also work with people all over the world, from governments to cities to different consortiums and universities. There is a ton of work. That network is so strong, with people sharing the best information that they have, working together to solve some of our big questions of our time. Now, I mentioned living collections earlier, and just if you're not familiar, not unlike how an art museum will have art collections where they'll have all this detailed information on each piece of art, where it came from, when it was last cleaned, etc., that's what we have with plants. It serves as a reservoir of genetic diversity. It can support scientific research and science-based conservation, and it can allow us to study really cool questions, such as like how different plants in the same environmental conditions, how they're performing, to how the same plant in different gardens around the world are acting. So we do this through our living collections. Again, each plant that is in a living collection, we have detailed information on it. We have our seed bank coming soon, where we are storing seeds as a genetic backup to make sure that if we need to, we can pull them out and support conservation in the future. And we also have our tissue culture lab, which that's just nutrient-rich medium where we can have really a sterile environment, so we can have some of our really cool like chrysanthemums growing and thriving to helping us germinate orchids. At Longwood, we have 12 core collections. And if you see that lovely little accreditation logo, that means that that is a nationally accredited collection. That means it's good. We had external people tell us it's good, that we reviewed all sorts of documents. It's very impressive, and it's very hard to get, and I think it's something that we should absolutely be proud of as an institution. The other thing I really love about Longwood, though, is it doesn't ignore that human-plant connection. Some of our collections, such as bonsai, Pierce's trees, these are plants that are really important to people and our time and history. And I think that's something that's really beautiful that should be celebrated. As an institution, we have a lot of specialized facilities, laboratories, the tissue culture lab, the soils lab. We have trial areas where we're making sure that the best of the best can be seen, but also that we're, seeing how different things grow in this environment. And we have greenhouses, over 29 growing zones. That's incredibly awesome. We also have a living laboratory. If you look at our outside, we have over 700 acres of natural lands and agricultural fields, and 225 distinct plant communities, which is amazing. What we do is we practice science-based conservation here. That means we're using that process of science to help us answer those big questions, to make sure that we have that resilient future. And in the strictest sense, we're doing this through collections, through reintroductions back into habitat, and through land stewardship. But conservation can look a lot of different ways. It can be everything, of course, from managing the landscape with fire. It can be educating others. It can be propagating seeds. These are all forms of conservation. And with Longwood, we also have the conservation of that human element, making sure we're conserving techniques, making sure we're conserving cool cultivars. This is an incredibly important part of that because plants and humans are absolutely interwoven. This is just a great picture that summarizes why gardens are important. First of all, we have the specialized facility. We have the information about these plants. We have that recorded. We have experts that know what they're doing. They know how to grow them. They know how to take care of them. And we have that willing audience that's coming to us to learn. People need plants, and plants absolutely, now more than ever, need people. And gardens are going to be key for securing the future of plants. If we're not doing it, it's not being done. So that's we're like Atlas. We got a huge weight on our shoulders, but we can do this. Because Longwood Science, we are absolutely changing the world.